The college basketball season is headed toward March Madness. We are in championship week. We're going to take this opportunity to revisit Cameron Boozer and talk about some of the best guards in the draft, as well as a visit with the NBA darling Charlotte Hornets. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This should be episode, I think, 240. I think technically the last episode I did was right around the All-Star break, which was like a solo episode about how I would solve tanking, which was a little thing I called the New Year's freeze, about freezing the standings on New Year's Day and then letting the bottom seven teams compete for lottery odds where wins count and not losses. Uh, that's basically what it is. Listen to that episode. I stand by it. A month on, I still feel very confident that that's the way to do it. Sounds like there's going to be some changes coming, but we move on. The last real episode I did was with Bennett Herbert about the Spurs and their title chances, and also talking about all the candidates really at the top of the 2026 class, which were Cameron Boozer, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonsa, Caleb Wilson, Keaton Wagler, and Kingston Fleming. That's who we talked about in that episode. I'm having a very good buddy back on the podcast, the author of the Split the Action Substack, Brian Geisinger. He actually came on in December to talk about the ACC, which was shaping up to have a very good draft class, still could have a very good draft class. And we discussed early season impressions of Boozer, Wilson, Mikel Brown Jr., Neo of Dallas, Patrick Gungba, and Henry Visar back in December, it must have been. But now that it's March, it's good to check back in and with a somewhat full body of work under us, revisit sort of these ACC prospects, as well as talk a bit about Darius Acuff, Tyler Tanner, and sort of the point guard glut in this class. That's a lot to cover, but I'm happy to do it with Brian. Brian, how are you, man? Welcome back.
I'm doing well, Chuck. Thanks for having me back. And yeah, excited to cover some ground here tonight, talking hoops. It's a good time of the year. I feel like March is often when I feel like I'm joining you in this month. So it's good to be back.
Good. Good, man. It is. Yeah. We've done a couple tournament episodes, I feel like, over the last
Mhm.
couple of years. It's been very, very nice. This is, when I think of recording with you in March, I think of Jordan Miller and,
Yeah.
Wooga Poplar and Norchad Omier and everyone else on the LA Clippers. So shout out to Miami and a tournament team this year at the University of Miami, Sheldon Henderson,
Yep.
that Mac truck. We could talk about him at some point, but
Yep.
we
Yep.
got bigger fish to fry. First and foremost, I should have mentioned that you host Buzzbeat, the Charlotte Hornets podcast, which I imagine is getting some ears this season. First of all, congratulations on your ongoing work. And real quick before we get into this year's draft, we spoke last year around this time about Kon Knueppel and Cooper Flagg and Kaman Malawach.
Mhm.
Um, Knueppel in many ways is sort of like the breakout star of the rookie class. Cooper has been really good, but the Hornets and Knueppel have been sort of the story of the league as far as young teams go. So on them, what what do you believe has been sort of the turnkey towards them being so good in the new year?
Oh, a couple of things, and I think it certainly starts with health. Because even when Khan was playing so well at the start of the season, the most of those first 2 months, Brandon Miller was out after getting hurt during the second game of the season. He missed a ton of time in the offseason. He comes back, he plays a couple of preseason games, and he can't even make it through the second game, in late October against Philly. But getting Brandon and LaMelo back into the lineup and then having Miller play at this level too, because to me, Khan has kind of just been doing this all season.
Hmm.
But there was a stretch earlier in the year where he was kind of like the 1A, 1B option with Miles Bridges. And then when Miller and LaMelo sort of like solidified and were healthy and have stayed healthy, two guys that even though they were teammates the two prior seasons, were on the, barely played together just because of their own health issues. So for those guys to be healthy is huge. It's also probably early January is around when Ryan Kalkbrenner, who was starting at center as a
Mhm.
rookie second round pick, he goes down with this elbow injury. And Musa Diabate, who had been a big part of the rotation, and was like very much a important contributor, but he gets elevated to the starting lineup. And so all of these things just sort of come together, right? And you get this brew with those three, guards who or wings, however you want to guard wing combos with LaMelo,
Mhm.
Miller, and Khan, plus Diabate, who I think has really given them a lot, an edge defensively and has been just like solid, doing just like good center stuff on both sides of the floor. But he's versatile guarding the pick and roll, and he can switch. He's small, he's undersized, but he can still function in the drop. He can still protect the rim. He's a tenacious rebounder. And then on the offensive side of the floor, I think he helps them on. He's like a decent short roll passer, and I think anytime they can get two on the ball, hit him on the short roll, and then he can reverse it. I mean, every time you're reversing it, it's for an open catch and shoot three for Brandon or Khan. These are like A-level shooters. And then I think Charles Lee has pushed a lot of the right buttons. I think he really came into the season and they were really hammering this guard screening action. The first 6 weeks of the season they were definitely leading the league in screens set by guards, the percentage of screens set with the five in the dunker spot. And that's continued to be a big piece of it. But as Diabate has come online more, and as they've really like built this creative offense, tapping into the skill sets of Miller and Khan, these two like young, tall, movement shooters who can put the ball on the deck and create and can pass. They've they've sort of like opened up to even more five out with Diabate sort of as the like middle hub and the sort
Mhm.
of like the handoff guy in those actions. And it's worked really well. And I think, yes, they've definitely had some good fortune here during this stretch, injury luck wise, with everyone back. Grant Williams, Josh Green, those guys coming, being healthy and adding defense and ball movement and shooting. Josh Green shot the corner three really well this year. So those guys coming in helped. But they've also did a nice job. Like they've managed LaMelo's minutes. Maybe if that's had a small minor impact on sort of like making him like more playable and sustainable as a piece this season. They've really got his minutes low and they've got his usage down at a more responsible level. And now having Kobe White in the mix, that
Yeah.
allows them to now have those two guys can play together and they have a decent amount so far, but it just means they've got another ball handler. And so they can just at all times they have this group of five guys who can create their own shot or shoot off the catch, and three of them are like homegrown draft picks, and guys that have very. I mean, Lamelo's already an all-star, but two other guys that have varying levels of future all-star potential too. So and then without goes without saying too, Khan's been unbelievable. I mean, he's been the guy's almost putting up 50, 40, 90 as a rookie, leads the league in threes made. He's broken all of these rookie three-point shooting records already. So him being this good has obviously accelerated things, and that's why they're sort of ahead of schedule at the moment.
Yeah. How, like, I imagine you're very pleased with what Charles Lee has done as a coach. You mentioned some of the lineup combinations and managing LaMelo's workload, but like frequently when a team takes off offensively like this, their defensive rating comes up with them, because, other teams taking the ball out of the hoop, you prevent transition defense. Also, if your team is clicking offensively, your effort tends to have a higher floor, on the other end. But what, apart from the Diabate switch for Kalkbrenner, Diabate is a more dynamic mover than Kalkbrenner, though Kalkbrenner is a good defender in his own right. Um,
Absolutely.
what what has the sort of defensive game plan been for the Hornets that has allowed them to like stabilize and become an actual threat. I mean, we don't need to get into their East chances, but they are clearly a team in the lower half of the bracket that higher teams would rather avoid playing.
Mhm.
And that's even in the East, that's quite an accomplishment given where they were at the beginning of the year.
I think they do a few things like core foundational type things well. This has been a very good defensive rebounding team, and that's sort of like everyone contributes to that, you know. It's obviously Diabate leads the way. Kalkbrenner's, he gives you he's an okay rebounder for a five, but that's like everyone's got to sort of like chip in with that. They don't foul. They don't force a ton of turnovers, but just like having that base where you clean up the glass, you end possessions, and you don't get into a lot of like silly fouls and have teams be in the bonus, have teams be at the line. Um, that just like starts them off at a good spot. Um, I think they definitely are benefiting from everyone playing hard. And even during year one of Charles Lee, when late in the season, this time last year goes, some of the rosters they were throwing out, it was like a joke. You know what I mean? I mean, just limping to the finish line. But those teams played hard. I think Charles Lee has gotten like good effort, good buy-in out of all of the guys, and when you're winning, that helps too. Um, the Hornets are a very good offensive rebounding team as well. And this is something that I would need to study a little bit more. But having heard, and Charles Lee was a former assistant with the Celtics with Joe Mazzulla, won a title together in 2024, hearing how the Celtics are using offensive rebounding to help their defense, how Joe Mazzulla is sort of like obsessed with crashing, and how while there was a period of time not long ago that would in theory really hurt you defensively
That's
and
right.
expose you in transition, there's now numbers in a strategy that goes in the other direction. And even I think it was after the Duke UNC game, or was one of the other. It was either Duke UNC or Duke UVA. It was one of the Duke games I covered recently. John Shire, who Duke basketball definitely like borrows a lot from the Celtics in different ways. He was talking about after the game, he was like, Duke uses their offensive rebounding approach, their crash approach to set up their transition defense. And he didn't like go into how exactly, he wasn't like breaking that down. But I gotta think there's something at play here with the Hornets too, with regards to that. And I think overall, I'd have to pull up the numbers, but I think their transition defense just like hasn't been bad by any stretch this season. And so if you're playing hard, if you're not getting crushed in transition, if you're cleaning up the glass, and if you're not fouling all that much, and they've done a very good job taking away corner threes this season too, then that even when you don't have like elite personnel, you can maybe build a like league average defense or like just
Hmm.
sub league average defense. And then when the offense is good, sort of to your initial point, and you're making them take the ball out of the net, well, then that allows you to then actually set up your half court defense. But I'll say this, I was fully expecting them this season to play a lot of like junk defenses and zone and all that sort of stuff. And really, like, they've played basically no zone aside from, every now and then. And they've really only played sort of like more like junk defenses when they've played like Curry, and then they top block and they really like just flood, extra players at Steph Curry. Or if you consider it a junk defense, when they play like the Hawks, they're always going to put Diabate or Kalkbrenner on on Dyson Daniels.
Dyson,
Or if
sure.
they
Yeah.
if they play New York, they're going to put them on Josh Hart.
Josh Hart.
In New York knows how to. Or if they play the Pistons, they're going to put them on Asar Thompson. Like they're just going to move they're if they're playing a wing non-shooter, they're almost absolutely guaranteed going to cross match.
Hmm.
So that is another thing, and I think Kalkbrenner's done a pretty good job navigating those waters as like a rookie, not super quick center, but I think he's done well in that regard too. So that would sort of be and then last thing has been they probably got some luck too. Like I was looking at this going into late last week, but basically like January 1st through March the 5th or 3rd or whatever, um, opponents were shooting 32% on threes against them and 31% on corner threes over this like, 8-week stretch, both of which were
Hmm.
the lowest in the NBA. So they're probably getting some luck there too. Um,
And part of that is also like health luck because they've stayed pretty healthy where a lot of teams have not. And this is the, unfortunately, there are lots of teams who are not really trying to win and not really trying to put their best shooting lineups out
A
right
third of the
now.
league.
And
They're
that's
like,
why,
yeah,
this stuff is going to change, why they should consider something a bit more radical than whatever they'll come up with. But
yeah.
yeah, like that's the thing. If you decide as an organization that like we are going to compete and you have offensive personnel, then the runway will be there for you. And
Mhm.
I have not studied the offensive rebounding transition defense nexus myself. I would imagine though that depending on how you do it, and I'm sure there's strategies on where
Mhm.
like what areas of the floor you crash from, what personnel you're using, but like to try to boil it down, I'm sure that the Hornets have identified who on their team are good offensive rebounders. It's not like an endlessly complicated question. You find the players who are really good at doing it. And if you have a good offensive rebounding lineup on the floor, then you're just at minimum forcing the defense to exert more effort in securing the defensive glass. And if you do that, then you have fewer guys running out in transition. And the yeah, I can see how it can have a cascading effect. Like I'm not
Yeah.
surprised that the numbers reflect what they reflect.
Yeah, same here. Again, I that is maybe an off-season project to sort of study it a little bit, but like you can see there's like a one you're highlighting the sort of like I think sort of like most like understandable, like it to me would like that's the one that sort of like makes the most sense, but I really want to know the sort of like alchemy that goes into it, like where exactly you're sending those guys from. What
Hmm.
are the rules? When can they crash? When should they look to get back? Does it depend on who's shooting, where the shot's coming from, like all of that sort of stuff. There's clearly like an approach that the Celtics are taking. There's an approach that Duke is taking, and my guess is the Hornets, which again really do. There's a lot of synergy between the Hornets and the Celtics, and between the Hornets and Duke basketball at the moment. It would make a lot of sense for them to be sort of like invested
Hmm.
in this approach and those numbers too.
Well, when we talked about Kon Knueppel last year, I would like to think that we were on the early end of like the Kon
Yeah.
wave in talking and discussing him as a legitimate star bet. And when we discussed him, I remember we were trying to figure out his approach to the game and sort of what the star version of him looks like. Essentially, like, was he going to in the NBA tend toward his sort of very polished connector skill set that he displayed at Duke, or would he become more of like that 1A, 1B we saw at the beginning of his Hornets career? Do you feel like, first of all, like where does how he is playing now fit on that spectrum? Number one, now that the Hornets have everyone healthy and I guess have hit their stride. And number two, do you see in future years, like, do you think that ratio will change more and they will put more and more on his plate?
Yeah, I think he's I don't want to say quite like smack dab in the middle of those two things. I think he's sort of like trending more towards the sort of offensive catalyst type side of the equation, but he's certainly not all the way there yet. Like, he it's really important for him to still have LaMelo out on the court. He can still struggle trying to beat guys off the dribble. He can still struggle trying to drive or make passes around like the Uber, like a McDaniels or a Thompson. Some of these other
Sure.
super physical, athletic, just like the like top tier wing defenders are going to give him trouble. Although like when he gets to play those guys the second time, he usually sort of does better the second
Hmm.
time. I think they really got him going well early this season by letting like and it's still been a big piece of the offense. We've talked about the guard screening actions. His work as a screener in this has been it's been the thing that's like made it work outside of like LaMelo, the passing and the shooting from LaMelo. It's Kon. His work in the pick and pop with LaMelo. I mean, those guys have hooked up dozens of times for pop threes this season. But he's so good on the short roll too. Um, and to me, that kind of role is something that is not really thought of with like star guard, like screen setter,
Right. Right.
or at least like in those kinds of like direct ball screen actions. Curry sets a ton of screens, but he does it sort of more in these like flowing off ball split actions with Golden State, where he's gonna screen and then back screen and then pop, or slice screen and then cut off a down screen in the other direction. And Khan does plenty of that too. But like one of the core tenets of Charlotte's offense is like middle pick and roll with Khan as a screener. And they've got, five in the dunker spot, and they've got double gaps open on both sides, shooters in the corners, and it's just
Hmm.
LaMelo and Khan dancing in the middle of the court, and they could just take their two best players. And depending on how the defense wants to cover it, like if they're going to switch, then Khan's probably going to do that little like hot stove, underneath screen, and he'll slip and get into the short roll. If they're putting two on the ball, he's going to pop. And those guys have like good chemistry doing that. There have been times this season, especially early on, when LaMelo and Brandon were out, where they were running a fair amount of, pick and roll for Khan. But I think they were like pretty selective with how they would do that. There would be, they would make sure to like have some advantage built up for him, heading into the screen, and then they'd send him off a staggered screen. You know what I mean? Not just, bring the ball up and just let him just create. Though he gets those opportunities occasionally, sort of like in early offense, secondary situations. And I think now they've really leaned into him as like this like A1 movement piece where a lot of more five out, screen to screen interactions, zoom actions, him coming off handoffs. Um, and again, that sort of is like maybe more in the domain of like not sort of like star level type creators, but because he's such a good shooter and he bends the defense so much, and because he's not just a stationary shooter and he can attack, if teams hard close out, he can really pass in the situations. He is playing like similar in some ways to how he was at Duke last season. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And so right now, I think they've got him just like starring in his role as this like really awesome complementary player. You know what I mean? Just like the best case kind of, doesn't need the ball, but teams are always worried about him as a shooter, as a screener. He helps get guys open. And when he's left open, he's just drilling jumpers from every level of the court. And he's been good in the mid range. He's been good from deep. He's been good in the short mid range. So I think he's flashed enough stuff to make you think like in flash stuff in terms of like numbers, in terms of production, in terms of like taking over, for stretches of big games, and sort of like being a more attack minded player with the ball. That I think it's in there. Like I think there's a chance for him to become maybe not like the guy, but a guy that is having even more of the offense sort of like routed through him as a creator. And he's still very, very young, and I think he's flashed enough. The handle looks better from where it was at Duke, and even for a guy that has like just a so-so first step and not even like the greatest handle in the world,
No,
his
I'd agree.
combination of like footwork, guile, shooting, the threat of his passing, all of it really does allow him to generate some good offense. But again, I think Charlotte's sort of like schemed up some ways to put him in good spots to get him some advantage, then flow him into those actions. So again, I think he can potentially be that version, but right now, if I still have to guess, like I think he's still more in like the like the maybe the Clay kind of. I mean, maybe he becomes like a Booker type guy, but I think there's a right now. I feel pretty safe that he can become a Clay, kind of like offensive piece. We'll see if he gets to the point where he can like take over, like Booker did this against them the other night, where he just like took the game over, creating his own shot and setting guys up. So, um, I think there's a possibility of that, but they still got a ways to go to get there because right now he's still getting a lot of these juicy looks, um, sort of in these kind of like secondary type of ways and playing
Hmm.
off of LaMelo and Brandon.
Well, what's so exciting about how they're using him is that, first of all, like it's fun to discuss, will he essentially, what we're talking about is like, well, is he going to average 27 a game one year or whatever, like in this sort of bookerish way? And those discussions are important for a number of reasons, and I'm glad that we get to have them. But there are so many players in the league who have so much talent, but there is always a tension between how they would like to play and what version of them is most conducive toward winning. Like there are players, good players, players who make all-star teams that just never figure out that alchemy, to use your word.
Mhm.
Like, like Brandon Ingram, who is good and has made the all-star team this season, and his team is whatever, sixth, seventh right now. So it's not as though I'm citing him as a cautionary tale, but he's on his third team because it has been a struggle for him to figure out how to scale, how to fit at scale with the right kinds of players. Not because he has some like fatal flaw, like the normal fatal flaw for talented players in the NBA is shooting, and he can shoot, but there's something about Khan's approach uh that that just smooths over all of that. And it has to do with how polished he is and how he knows how to play. Your comparison to Clay is really interesting because Clay, I feel, I'd have to go back and watch him at Washington State. But he was at Washington State, I believe, 3 years, 2 or 3 years
Mhm.
before entering the league, and
Three. Yeah.
uh assumed more on-ball responsibility the longer that he was there. I think he probably started out a bit more as sort of a catch and shoot wing, playing off of a point guard. More recently at Washington State, Jalen Wells had a similar thing over the course of his season there before being drafted by the Grizzlies. And like I very, very much buy into players who learn how to play in different kinds of ways before they get to the NBA, because
Mhm.
they're going to start facing this tension. There's not, you're not going to get to play the way you want to play, with very, very few exceptions. Now, like Khan actually is one of those exceptions because, as we've discussed, he likes to play in this more quick touch
Yeah.
style of offense, which is great. But guys like Wells and Thompson, there's a bunch of other, like my guy, Trey Murphy. There are so many big shooters who take a while to arrive in the league physically, where like whether or not they were one and dones, it's really when they hit ages like 22, 23, 24 that you start to see these starish outcomes. That the fact that Khan, who's never going to be confused as being a better athlete than any one of those players, is already where he is at like 2021, like it makes you think of a different kind of star talent, which has
Mhm.
always been what's so attractive to me about him. And when we talked about him, I think I talked about like his feel for the game and compared him to like Jokic and Luca, which,
Luca. Yeah.
you know, whatever, goated episode. But I think like when you think about a guy, like I remember when the Warriors were like the mega death Warriors with Durant, and maybe even before Durant, like the 72 3-win version of them, where there was like, oh man, why don't they just let Steph play pick and roll and just have him run pick and roll like James Harden or like Russell Westbrook or these other dominant like MVP level guards? Can you imagine what his numbers would be? And granted, the Warriors play a little dogmatically, probably, not that they're going to apologize with the titles they've won playing that way. But it's like, no, like he had his style of play tends to elevate everyone else because it increases the touches that everyone else gets. And Steph is a more physically talented player than Khan. But the fact that it's just I think it is just very rare to find a guy who can play that way, who like who's not playing that way by necessity.
Mhm.
Khan, the assumption is that he probably could turn the dial up, especially given what he showed early in the season. But the fact that he wants to be so finely tuned in the middle of usage, of play type, of role as an off-ball screener,
Mhm.
there aren't many other guys to compare him to in the league. Like right
Yep.
now, there's not that many guys who play the way that he plays. And
Yep.
it's just the proof of concept's already there. And wherever he's going to go, he's going to be one of a very select group of guys who takes that path. That's what is so exciting to me about him.
Yep. Yeah. The honestly, one of the other guys who does some version of this, Brandon Miller is also super malleable, and
Yep.
can do some of these things that we're talking about too. It's very having those two guys together is an interesting dynamic because there's you in theory it feels like there's some overlap, and there probably is to an extent. Like you could probably find two guys that like in theory could like complement each other like maybe a little bit better, but that's I don't know, like that even that feels like a little reductive because like they're because of how those guys are willing to like cut, move, screen, play quick, play fast. They can really like help the other guy open up, even though one of them is not sort of like a power slasher and the other one is this sort of like movement shooter. Those guys I think do end up complementing each other pretty well. Um, you said something that was interesting and had me thinking about this with Khan. Like you said, when you come into the NBA, broadly speaking, you're not going to be able to play. There's no guarantee you're going to get to play the game the way that you want to play it. Like everyone's
Right.
going to have to sacrifice something, and for the collective, it's just part of the reality. But Khan, it's interesting because it's like he is playing the way he wants to play right now.
Right.
But
That's what
it's in this like very like comp like but what helped what one of the reasons why it really works is because Khan playing this way and excelling in this role allows everyone to get like a little bit closer to their own basketball nirvana too. Like
hmm
he's out there with his screening, his shooting, his passing, his anticipation, his feel, and that just makes it a little bit easier for everyone else offensively. You know what I
Right.
mean? Everyone else, LaMelo can do more stuff. Brandon has more opportunities. Musa Diabate's got more opportunities to roll or to be a passer on the short roll, all that kind of more 5 out initiation, that kind of stuff. So yeah, Khan is like a tough guy to put into like there's a lot you can look at his shooting stats and then immediately in his physical profile attributes, and it's like I could come up with the list of players that like he reminds us of. We've literally done that already.
We
But
have.
I'm enjoying that we're thinking about his like this is a sort of slightly parallel way to think of or perpendicular way to think of his game, in terms of what it means for the collective of like a half court offense to have Khan sort of like playing at this level, playing it this way. And it's gonna be fascinating to see like where he goes from here because he's already a very good like he's already a really, really good player. Um, and it's gonna be interesting to see like how he scales over time.
Well, and the screening thing is just such a good example of how he alleviates everyone else. And you mentioned earlier where you're like, yeah, not many teams use an elite shooter as a screener in this way. And you understand on one level why most teams don't do that, which is like, well, if we have an elite shooter, we want him shooting, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
That's been sort of the whole arc of NBA history. And I think we discussed this in our episode last year about that, about how he can ghost, and Duke would frequently have him ghost. But we actually thought there was more as like just a screener to open up driving lanes, force
Hmm.
switches, whatever. And the reality is that NBA offensive talent has reached such a level that you don't need to tilt your offense so that your best shooter gets to shoot. You are
Hmm.
much better. Well, I don't say much better. You are frequently better understanding how to use the threat of your best shooter just to create the easiest look for anybody, because any given person you have on the floor is going to be able to score from at least one area of the floor very, very well. And if
Mhm.
you're a perimeter guy, not a center, if you like take Musa off of this list, you're probably going to have four three-level scorers on the floor at any one time.
Yeah.
Most teams, most starting lineups. And of course, like, it makes intuitive sense. If Kon screens, what are you going to do? Blitz the ball handler? No, you're going to die if you do that.
Yeah.
You have to dedicate so much attention to him that the advantage that you hope to create by setting any screen is gonna be there for LaMelo or for whoever the ball handler is. And I think many great shooters, like Luke Kennard's a really good shooter. Like, he does not have the strength and just the like, and
Hmm.
he doesn't have experience setting real screens. Like, he's been a ghost screener his whole career. Like, he
Hmm.
can't, like, there's just a real skill to doing it. I don't want to get into like too much of like a screen assist tangent. We've heaped
Yeah,
enough
yeah,
praise
yeah,
on Con already. But
yeah.
like, it's the sort of thing that's very simple, but just it's the sort of thing that I think can get copycatted around the league, but
Hmm.
will not be copycatted successfully immediately, because that is something that Con is like uniquely built with how strong he is to do, that many really good shooters are not necessarily built to do.
I think we talk about creating advantages in the half court all the time, right? And I think in the sort of college basketball to NBA pipeline with like the draft, like this pod that we're talking about as sort of this like through line that connects all of these things. And I think often when we talk about advantage creation, it's like the person with the ball. It's like, is this a pick and roll operator that can force the defense to put two to the ball or can turn the corner and force teams to help? Or if they see drop coverage, sort of like Khan, he's good at taking the ball into the paint and sort of like getting into those 2-on-1s and forcing the center to make a decision or whatever. Um, but we think a lot about the ball, or we think about like an isolation or a post up guy that can get a switch and force the defense to double team. Can you get two on the ball that way? Or is there some sort of like schematic way to do it with lots of fancy actions, all that kind of stuff? But it's interesting to see the way that Khan is being used to like create advantages in the half court for Charlotte right now. And a lot of it has to do with his work as a screener, whether it's in these sort of like direct guard screening actions, or Charlotte runs a ton of double drag action for, LaMelo brings the ball up the court. They set two staggered ball screens in early offense. Khan will slip one and sort of like run underneath the formation and pop out to the wing, and he's gotten tons of good looks off of that stuff. It opens up the floor for LaMelo as a driver. He can get into the paint. He can make good decisions. He can look for the five in the dunker spot or rolling to the rim or whatever. So, um, it's you have to, I think, sort of expand a little bit how you think about like advantage creation, and having this kind of like shooter and screener um, is like maybe something new that we're sort of
Yeah.
like looking at this stage. It's probably too early to tell for sure, but um, it's it's interesting to see, especially in the context of like playing with other guys like LaMelo and Brandon Miller, and like what it does to help those guys get open. And like I will say, I think there's a chance that if this team makes it into the playoffs, there's a good chance they run into Boston, Detroit, or whomever. I do think there's a chance they just run into a team that can switch everything, that they flatten them out, and all of a sudden, like all of the cute guard screening actions, all that
Sure.
stuff. I think like you can flatten them out, take it away, and then like all of a sudden they have all these good players, but unless one of or two of Miller, LaMelo, or Khan get hot shooting off the dribble, then it's tough for them to like really get you in the blender offensively. So like they're going to need they're going to need to improve it. These guys are going to need to get better individually. They're going to need to find new pieces to complement this kind of stuff. But so far it's certainly I mean, they've built a very good offense with this as its foundation.
And they could just always go into Boston and win by 28 again. I mean,
It's,
that's one thing they could do.
it's
But
true. They
like,
could.
again, as I try to conceive of what we're talking about how there's like something new happening with the way that they're using him. New is always a dangerous word to use in basketball
Yeah.
because there's always someone
Almost
who's
nothing's new, too.
right. There's someone
Mhm.
who's seen it all being like, are
Yeah.
you kidding me? I was
Yeah.
around when
Yeah.
whatever, such and such used such and such in
Yeah.
such a manner. But like there's two more things now that are coming to my mind. I swear we're going to talk about the draft if you signed on to talk about the draft. I'm sure there's some AI like segment at the bottom directing you to the draft talk. But the look, number one, I would say when I think about 2010s, 2020s basketball and how there was this emphasis on going quote unquote small that the Warriors ushered in, and then there's been this emphasis on quote unquote unicorns, which is a term that quickly became sort of self-parodic because there's been so many of them. And now there's double bigs, and these trends happen very, very fast. But one part of it that I think has remained pretty consistent is the idea that to the extent that you have a player, like you mentioned, Asar, Josh Hart, like someone who is not as good a stationary shooter, someone that can sag off or whatever, the idea has been to make that person a screener. Like, how are we going to make things harder on the
Yeah.
defense so that they cannot just sag off this person? Let's put this person to use and put them into the short roll, and hopefully like Asar and Hart are both like good short roll passers. They both have excellent feel. And so it's a way to sort of like salvage a less than ideal player. You're turning a weakness into sort of like a net neutral for your offense. If you're lucky,
Mhm.
maybe a slight positive. And again, at a very basic level, it just makes so much sense if you have the player to do it. And I just want to emphasize that Khan is a rare player. It's like, well, why wouldn't you want your best decision maker in the middle of the floor making decisions rather than as sort of a salve for a mediocre offensive player? Why not just get your best or second best offensive player to the middle of the floor as frequently as possible? Or in like another example, to quote another recent Duke draftee, like rookie Derek Lively played in the NBA Finals in part he was playing off of Luca in part because he was a very good passer to the corners out of the short roll. Like, and that was a real skill of his that should make him plenty of money in the NBA, assuming he comes back healthy, and good for Derek Lively. But like, imagine if you had like a 40% free throw shooter making those short roll reads all of the time, and imagine how the defense would have to react to that player, where when
Mhm.
they get the ball they're a threat to pop it back out and run a handoff. And like there's you just become so much more dynamic if you have your most skilled players operating in the middle of the floor as much as possible. It just
Mhm.
makes so much sense. And the other thing about Khan is that one thing that I've believed about the league this decade is that your nominal like shooting guard position has, with some exceptions, but has like the value in that position has tilted a bit more defensive than offensive with players that I've tried to call switchblade. I have called switchblade guards. That's like your Derek White, Herb Jones, Drew Holiday, Dort Caruso, these guys who are offensively survivable, but their principal value to a team is defensive because it is on defense where they are compensating the most for like their high usage offensive stars. Khan is sort of a very clever sort of inversion of that idea where instead of making things easier by compensating defensively for high usage stars, he lowers the usage of his star teammates. I
Mhm.
guess with the idea being that everyone can expend a little bit more effort on defense. Again, I don't feel like I'm saying anything like that new or that
Mhm.
insightful, but there has been this shift away from the sort of helio ball of the 2010s where so many offenses were revolving around high usage players who did need all that defensive accommodation just because it took so much out of them to run these offenses that the more egalitarian offenses get, you can you don't need to have these sort of like archetypes at each spot. It's sort of like a glimmer into, I guess, a more sophisticated, for lack of a better word, form of offensive ball. And like, yeah, the playoffs are going to have to test it. Obviously, you want elite two-way play where you can get elite two-way play. But as offenses continue to evolve, I just think that making it so that your offense doesn't run out of gas just by virtue of its own style, that it's not like a white dwarf exploding under just sort of the burden of high offensive usage in the playoffs. I think that like there's really something to that. I think a more and like the Warriors have been proof of it, but like a more egalitarian style of offensive ball, I think is more durable. And
Mhm.
if you have the players to achieve that, then you don't need to lock yourself into, well, we need to have this defensive specialist here who we're going to use as a screener on offense and give something away there. Like you're not forced to make the same sorts of like inherent calculations, I
I
guess.
feel like some version of this was talked about like in the playoffs last year and probably coming into the season this year. You and I maybe even discussed it a little bit too, but like there is this like Indiana Pacers approach, right?
Of
And there's
course.
obviously like a lot going on there, and you're having a straw like Halliburton to stir the drink, just this like special passer shooter, obviously like can really make it sing. But just like again, moving away from the sort of like helio ball into like, well, can you have five guys who can you have like multiple guys who can like initiate not just initiate your offense, but can like combine together in different actions and can just sort of like flatten some of those usage curves and sort of again make it a little bit more not just balanced, but more likely, more flowing, more random, more likely to like scramble a defense to sort of like splinter matchups and create scenarios where you can snap into an advantage or snap into a matchup that you like or whatever. And I do think that's one of the things that like the Hornets have sort of stumbled into with this lineup that's been so good is that they do have a collection of guys who can it's not a one-to-one comparison by any means, but having that type of like collective dribble pass shoot on the court at the same time, and then having multiple guys like Brandon and Kon and LaMelo can even get to this too, that are so willing to roam around as screeners and shooters, really does just allow you to like not just decentralize the offense, but to spark advantages sort of like with any combination of players and then
Yeah.
build on those advantages with whomever else is on the court. Like you don't need to absolutely like have the lineup, have the actions, like have you can just snap into it. So um I do sort of again, I think a lot of people are gonna try to like take from the Pacers approach or from the approach that Boston is doing this year or whatever. But maybe the Hornets are worth sort of a study in this regard too, because they seem to have stumbled into something that's better than the sum of its parts on offense. And again, I think a lot of that is due to these like three special players, and Khan certainly has had a big impact there.
And I agree. It's been a lovely discussion. I think we did talk about like the Pacersification,
Hmm.
obviously, and it's hard to replicate. I think what a lot of the lessons that people took from the Pacers were defensive about, applying more, 94, maybe not 94 feet, but just
Hmm.
applying more on-ball pressure earlier and trying to acquire the players that can do that. And that's the easier thing to copy because I mean, there's lots of great players chomping at the bit to get into the NBA who will say like, "I'll be your dog." Like I'll sick me
Yeah.
at point of attack on an opposing star guard for 12 minutes in a game, and I will make his life hell. There are guys like that every single year. It's and it's the offensive part of it that is harder to crack. And that's why the offensive talents that sort of evolve NBA styles are the ones that in retrospect go really, really high in drafts. It's hard to find a
Mhm.
Halliburton and it's hard to find a Kon. And in that vein, I want to shift our focus to Cam Boozer
Yep.
because when we spoke about him a few months ago, uh, we were both complimentary. Uh, I think what I had noticed was sort of a stylistic trend of his that I did not love. And this was all matters of degree because I was like, well, do you draft him first, second, third, fourth? Like, obviously, he's a top of draft player. But there was a stylistic trend of his where, like, he couldn't gain a lot of separation. A lot of his stuff one on one was just sort of like brute force, let me hit you out of the way. And though he has a varied post game, his post game was not usually based on like wrong footing someone, faking someone into leaving their feet. He can do that stuff a little bit, but it was a much more just like fundamentally sound. Let me use, my wide body, my shoulders, my elbows just to get
Mhm.
sort of an angle where I can access my touch. And that's been it was effective for him early in the season when we first spoke. It's continued to be effective for him, but it made me wonder, and I think it's made a fair amount of people wonder about what his ultimate ceiling is. Because I think even as we speak right now, even with the off-court questions, if you can call them those, about Peterson, or sort of the peaks and I don't want to say valleys, but sort of the more, I guess, inconsistent. It's not even like DeBonce has been good the whole year, but he's had games where he's been very inefficient. Boozer has not really had that. He has just been metronomic in his production and in his consistency, which is in keeping with what he was as a youth prospect, and something that he's always had in this class coming into the year and throughout the year is the pedigree of the guy who like reads the game the quickest. The same way that, in my opinion, Kon read the game quickest in last year's draft. The same way that I think history has shown that Halliburton read the game the quickest in his year. Like, I want to get into sort of the minutia of how Cam is doing what he's doing because it's important. But I I want to start with sort of what I felt like my conclusion was going to be about him, which is like when you see someone who sees the game this well, don't get hung up on how their body looks. There were
Mhm.
questions about Halliburton's physique or lack thereof. There was questions about Khan's athleticism or lack
Mhm.
thereof. But it they so quickly like answered those questions and uncovered levels to how they could affect an offense that you can't really get hung up with the physical stuff with Boozer either. And Boozer is arguably, probably maybe not even arguably, more physically talented than either one of those guys. Doesn't move around the perimeter the way that either one of them does, but has other stuff that he can go to that can
Mhm.
spam the rim in a way that neither of those guards can. So it's, I guess the real question is whether or not he has like really, really good feel only, or if he has sort of Knueppel Halliburton savant level feel. I tend to think it's the latter. But if you
Yep.
find a guy who reads the game that well and whose production backs it up, then like in my opinion, like he's not gonna be lower than number two for me, if
No.
that, in this class. Like this is the ultimate, like, please, I don't want to say don't overthink it because I've already overthought it. Just stop
Mhm.
overthinking it. Just like
Yep.
he's got it. And as a screener, you put Cam in the middle of the floor, your offense is going to be in very, very good hands. But that's sort of my little spiel on where I've been on Boozer. But where are you on him? What have you seen sort of since we last spoke in December?
I'm with you. I think my floor for him in this draft would be the number two pick. he's been insane this season. I've been really, really, really impressed as his production has not just sort of taken off, but has sort of like grown in interesting directions throughout the season. Coming into this year, a lot of discussion was about how versatile of a shooter he was. He could shoot from every location in the half court. He was, could light it green. Um, but he can also just like make plays and make decisions from all of those spots too. And to see how Duke has used him either as a lead ball handler, which you're going to probably be seeing more of down the stretch this season, and that inverted pick and roll with he and Isaiah Evans has been money in the bank. It's the play that it's how they beat Florida. It's how they won a bunch of Michigan State, Arkansas. They've swung these games with Boozer as like decision maker in the middle of the court, like we were just talking about. You can flip it. He can just as easily be a screener. His work as a like post up passer, like isolation, mid post isolation passer. He has had some really good coaches in the ACC this season just grasping for straws in terms of like where are we double teaming from? When are we double teaming from? Oh God, another cutter just got an open dunk. We need to stop double teaming him. Like that is, I can't tell you, probably in the last month or two, there have been multiple ACC teams, Louisville, Wake Forest, UNC. There were certainly some others that mid game had to be like, screw what we're doing is bad against him. We have to stop. We can't double
Hmm.
team him because it's an open three or it's a dunk every time. He sometimes is so like ahead of the defense. One of my favorite things with him, and you really see this if you're like really like clipping his plays and charting him, is that like sometimes he'll catch the ball in those like isolation or post up situations, and the defense has stopped double teaming him, but they're just like loading. They've just got their boxes and elbows, or they've got one a helper that's sort of like a step or two in his direction, but not all the way committed. But because he's seeing things, because he can map the floor, and because he can sort of like anticipate where guys are going to rotate to, and he can sort of like he's processing, the best place to put the ball. Like he can throw, and he's a great passer in terms of like velocity, accuracy, all that type of stuff. Like
Incredible, yeah.
he throws guys open even in situations where there aren't necessarily like two defenders on the ball. Do you know what I mean? Like the defense is like loaded to him, but in theory, there's still like a hat on a hat across the board.
Right, right,
But
right.
because one player has taken like a half step or 1.5 steps too far in his direction, he can just slingshot it. And it's an open catch and shoot three or it's a catch and go drive he creates advantage like that just instantly with his ability to like really just like pass ahead of the defense. And I mean the production has been insane. 30% usage, 26% assist rate, 13% turnover rate, drawing 4.2 shooting fouls per 40 minutes. That's in the 99th percentile nationally. Um, he is a incredibly productive and efficient offensive player. Even his like so-so like C minus type games this season, they were still efficient. It was still a ton of stats, and he was still like making the right plays constantly. Excellent shooter, excellent footwork, and again, like he might have this sort of like right, or it seems like he has this sort of like special ability to process and pass and play make. And even if he has these limitations as a slasher, as a driver, and I think it's like worth acknowledging that stuff. Like he has found a way to problem solve around that stuff already, and my guess is he is going to continue to work on and develop more counters to have that continue to be a big part of his game, while also still giving you all of this incredible playmaking and sort of like advantage creation, either with his passing or with his like screen setting and relocation.
Yeah, and I I can only imagine, like, so he plays with Gungba and Malik Brown, who are two very, very good defensive players, defensive
Mhm.
bigs. We can talk about Malik. I know you want to talk about Malik,
My
but
favorite player in the country this season, I think. He's tall Reese Beekman. I'm not even joking. It's like the same thing. It's bad.
like Cam is going to like in the NBA, he is a power forward. There again,
No doubt.
there's going to be a temptation to be like, well, we can go small five with him or whatever. And I'm sure there will be times where he does play small five in the NBA, but like the way that he positions himself for rebounds and his limitations as a jumper, as a rim protector, means that he's going to play power forward, and you're going to want to play him with a more jumbo, traditionally sized five. But it's not like, even though that's probably the best version of him, like those lineups are the best version of him, like I don't see that as any reason to discount his ceiling at all. Like Darren Peterson's going to need to play with a 5 too. You can't play center with him either. Like everyone needs to play with some other kind of player. And again, Boozer's such a good passer that I can't really imagine the five, like the center that he plays with, that he cannot make better.
Yep.
Like make better with offense, like use it, like say an actual sentence, that he cannot integrate into a harmonious partnership on offense.
Yep.
Like if there's a center that he is unable to do that for, it is the fault of that center, because that center is probably like a black hole, or probably has really bad hands, or probably shouldn't be starting at center in the NBA anyway because of these inherent limitations. Like if you can't dance with Boozer as your four, then it's going to be on you much more so than it's on Boozer. And since we first talked about him, where his shooting was like okay, but it wasn't like matching his maybe his youth numbers. He's up to 40% on threes. He's 64% on twos. And you know, I can probably come up with some sort of search really quick to just try to contextualize his dominance. But what to remember about him as far as scoring the ball is that in NBA space, his team, I would imagine pretty quickly, will be among like the five best in targeting and converting at the rim, either
Mhm.
as a passer, helping to, hit guys open either with lobs or on cuts or whatever, if he's like further out as a hub, as a mismatch punisher himself, as someone attacking a closeout. I want to talk about how I've noticed how he attacks closeouts, or as just a finisher himself. The like all really good players, he understands what like very simple truths are about the game, and he knows the rim is where you want to be. And
Mhm.
he can get to the rim himself in a variety of ways, and he can get his teammates there in a variety of ways. And at a very just sort of base level, that's what you want. I mean, that's what you want. So I I'll kick it back to you. I don't want to kick it back to you cold, but like,
Mhm.
has there been dimensions to the Duke offense from earlier in the year that he has helped unlock that you did not anticipate, where you're like, that has actually worked out better than I thought, viewing them in pre-conference play?
I think yeah, I think there's a couple ways to go about it. I think the first one that comes to mind has been his importance with getting a guy like Dame Sarr going,
Hmm.
because Sarr, and maybe he's a guy we'll talk about at some point this summer, or maybe he's a 2027 guy, we'll see. But Sarr is this like amazing, perimeter wing defender for Duke. But middle of the season, he was sort of like lost offensively. And Duke was trying different stuff, transition game, turn him into a cutter, make him, really have him in those corners for threes. And they were trying to find more ways to kind of like get him going. And I think Boozer has been crucial to getting Sarr going. I mean, you see those guys in transition where Cam throws the touchdown pass over the top and Sarr's the, receiver running behind the safety to leak out and get the dunk. Or in the half court, knowing that Sarr is always going to be occupying those corners, and then having a guy like Cam Boozer, who's one of the best players in the country at creating corner threes this season, one of the best in the draft for these purposes at creating
Hmm.
corner threes. Like I think he has helped get Sarr going. And now that Sarr is like viable offensively, then it allows his defense to like really sing. And he's been this like amazing, point of attack disruptor for Duke this season, which has the number one defense in the country. So that is definitely part of it. I think Gungbuck gets a lot of credit for this stuff too, but like Isaiah Evans, after like an okay but not amazing start, spent the last couple of weeks, basically prior to the UNC game, red hot shooting the ball. In Boozer, whether it's him setting screens in empty corner, pick and roll, whether it's offensive rebounds that he kicks back out, it's a post up that he gets a double team on that he's going to skip it out for an open three, whether it's the inverted pick and roll. Maybe the inverted pick and roll is another thing that like I knew would be a part of the offense just because it was a big deal with Cooper last season too. But like that's been their like bread and butter play. Has been a post up for Cam or inverted pick and roll with Cam running in the middle of the court. And Evans as this sort of like roving screener and shooter has really like worked well in that regard too. But so much of Duke's offense is this like face up 5 out action where you're having Gongba Brown or Cam Boozer facilitate from the high post and you're getting back screens and split action and staggered screens and like all of this sort of like flowing movement, sort of like orbiting around these like front court playmakers. That's what makes this team so special outside of just like Boozer being and amazing. And I think he has just helped get open shots, high percentage shots for everyone this season. And I think, prior to unfortunately Caleb Foster got hurt against UNC. Foster's had a
Hmm.
career year too, and I think a lot of that he gets a lot of credit for it. But I think getting to play off a guy like Boozer has really helped him. He can spot up. He's a good spot up shooter. He can work in those inverted screening actions. And again, I just think he has made life easier for these guys that were like offensive, not Evans necessarily, but like Sarr, Foster. These were guys that offensively were question marks at points of the season or coming into the season. I think Boozer not by single-handedly, but I think he's had a big responsibility in having those guys just like immediately get to like the best versions of themselves offensively this year. Boozer's averaging 2.3 assists at the rim per 40 minutes this season. It's in the 99th percentile.
Hmm.
He's averaging 1.3 assists on above the break threes per 40 minutes. That's in the 94th percentile nationally. And he's averaging 0.8 corner three assists per 40 minutes. That's in the 98th percentile among, his player type. So he leads the team in assists that result in layups or rim finishes. And he's like top two or three on the team in assists, on threes per 40 minutes too. So just like he is the guy that through his ability to create advantages and make good reads, he's just getting good looks for everyone else on the offense.
And like you made the point, but the again, you might say, well, why is Duke's defense so good if Boozer is just sort of not the most athletically gifted, defensively tilted player? And like, yeah, you can play guys who would be low usage, inconsistent offensive options on other teams, like defensive specialists, quote unquote. You can play them at higher minutes because Boozer's tide lifts their boat. It's whatever. I mean, I don't want to just restate it, but he is a marvelous player. And there is like, I said I would try to contextualize how he has been so good. He is the only player, at least in the Bart Torvik database, the only player to make 160 shots at the rim. He's made 186. But
Mm-hmm.
the filter of 160 shots at the rim, 150 free throws, and 40 threes. This
Mm-hmm.
is going back to like 2008. That's it. He's the only guy to do that. And he's 18 years old. And that is to
That's
say
that's the
nothing
other
of,
piece too. Yeah.
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 He like to say nothing of what he opens up for his teammates. That's not including like an assist filter. It's not including his deflections on defense. It's just at the rim and hitting free throws, which is sort of like rim attempts, but even more
Yeah.
efficient. Rim, free throws, threes, like do you make your buckets? And that's all I got to say. So if you have questions about his scoring scalability, just know that he's already in uncharted ground for how much he makes in the variety of ways in which he makes them. So yeah, he's the
My
man.
my only real concern for him is just like I'm not worried about this too much. Is like I do think it's notable that when Duke made sort of like really like came together defensively, and some of this had to do with like Sarr becoming more viable for them, Malik Brown getting healthier. But in mid-January, after the stretch where they lost to Texas Tech and then had close games against Georgia Tech and FSU, to like sort of like bottom dwellers in the ACC this year, they stopped like auto switching 1 through 4 with Boozer. And if you've watched Cam since basically since like the first game against Louisville, I think is maybe when it was, but it was like early to mid January. They've been using him to like hedge ball screens and recover. And like
Hmm.
I can't tell you the last time I saw a Duke team, regardless of who was coaching it, whether it was John Shire or Mike Krzyzewski, that wasn't switching 1 through 4. And I think I've talked with John Shire about it this year. He said he thought it sort of like helped them because it forced all of their guards to have to like fight over screens, and he thought that that had some sort of like compounding benefit for them on that side of the court. But it also kept Cam Boozer out of like bad matchups along the perimeter. But like NBA teams aren't going to do that. And so like this is something that like he's going to have to get better at, or you're going to have to be sort of like thoughtful in terms of scheme or who's playing with him, that kind of stuff. The offense, I'm not like I feel very confident that he's going to be a very good player on that side of the court. Defensively, I think there's some stuff to still sort of like sort through. Because but again, he's not even 19. He'll get stronger. He'll hopefully get better laterally, like all those types of things too. So
And
that's part
I,
of it, though.
I mentioned earlier that he's going to play with a jumbo five because of his limitations as like a rim protector, and that is true. But I want to stress that if the if his opponent decides that they're going to go small, like okay, like if you are not going to punish him with like a vertical threat at the rim where he has to play the sort of one-on-two game and pick and roll, and where he can now really leverage his rebounding. Like whatever small five he plays against, he's in all likelihood going to be like a more creative, better passer, likely a more polished initiator of offense himself, and he's probably going to rebound the ball a lot better. So if you go small, I imagine that he will be able to match you in going small and get his team better shots. But if the other team doesn't make that first move, then yes, he will need to play with a five. And I think
Mhm.
defensively, as like you mentioned with Duke about keeping him out of bad matchups, like on offense, his best spot is in the middle of the floor where he can anticipate where the ball is likely to go and where they're going to try to bend the defense and shade himself a little bit this way or that way, and then use his sort of instincts and his hands to sort of gum stuff up and break stuff up. And that's like it is certain that the NBA will stress that and test that
Mhm.
out because defense in the NBA, unless you're a big, and in many cases, even if you are a big, is sort of like an exercise in ground coverage. So, like, there will be times where he gets blown by, particularly if he's trying to close out to a shooter. Of course, like he's going to give something up. I just think the quality of looks that he projects to generate is going to outweigh that pretty quickly in the NBA, if you had to
Definitely,
guess.
totally agree. Totally agree. He's awesome, and it's not like he does some stuff defensively. Like I think his work in passing lanes is pretty good. He gets a lot of steal, like pick six steals, because he just sort of like appears in the passing lane, and he got great hands, and
Yep.
he can cause deflections and then win loose balls. And then like I mean, this is sort of beside the maybe I don't think this is beside the point, but just to tack it on, like he's super competitive. Like I've gotten to spend time around this team, around Cam. He's super competitive. He's a super good teammate. Everyone likes it. He just checks all of the other sort of like intangible boxes too that would come along with a team sort of like willing to bank a high pick and a load in a presumably, deep loaded draft class on this guy. It's going to be really interesting to see if he ends up in Indiana. Like if the Pacers retain this pick and this guy gets to play with Halliburton and Zubac, like that would be kind of sick. So
And Siakam, who's your
that's
three?
yeah, exactly. That's sort of like where I'm in, Neesmith. I mean, it would be like a pretty fun mix. That's maybe where I'm sort of rooting for him to land, but obviously, any team who gets this guy, if he ends up in Dallas with Lively and Cooper, that could be kind of cool too. But I think the Mavs
True.
have had plenty of luck in the lottery already. So we'll
Yeah, same with, the owner of the Pels pick, the Atlanta Hawks,
it's
Jalen
true.
Johnson and Boozer
That
and
would be
Kongwu and whatever. But
that would be
yeah,
very cool. That would be
yeah.
very cool as
It's
well.
it's like the opportunities are all juicy because you're like, oh yeah, that team supporting offensive talent is a lot better than Duke's. All due
Yeah,
respect to Duke's, but
yeah.
yeah, it's easy to sort of get lost. Um, so ironically, Boozer did not play badly in the game in which they lost to North Carolina, but that was very much a signature game for Caleb Wilson,
Mhm.
who in the very next game sustained the injury that was going to keep him out until this week, and then he broke his thumb, unfortunately, in practice, and it ended up being, that Duke game ended up being his second to last game of the year and might have been his best overall performance in that game where they won at the buzzer in Chapel Hill. And where I think he held his own and, in my opinion, at worst played Boozer to a draw and very
Mhm.
possibly outplayed him, though I've not watched that game back for a few weeks. Uh, Wilson is someone who I feel like there's been something about him that I feel like I am higher on than most people because I think he's just been either penciled or penned in at like number four in this class. Like, oh, there's these three signature talents, and oh, then there's Caleb Wilson, and the rest of the draft begins. I think he's better than that. There are still games I want to see, so I hesitate being so concrete. But my guess is I'm gonna have him in the top two or three. I think that highly of him.
Mhm.
But it's also, with his time off, there's also been time for him to like not slump the way that, maybe DeBonsa has slumped or Peterson has slumped or stuff like that. So
Mhm.
I Wilson, well, I'll ask you first. Do you feel as though because Wilson operates as less of a hub offensively than Boozer does. Wilson is a better athlete, projects as a more versatile defender, but the offensive, I think the people who say that he can't be in the top three are people who, again, see an offensive ceiling with him because they just sort of wonder how much offensive responsibility he can really handle. What did you see about the offensive responsibility he handled this year at UNC and how that sort of game might mushroom in the pros?
I mean, he nailed the role that they put him in, and they really like gave him a fair amount of autonomy to like do his thing in the offense. But I think not in the same way that Boozer did, but I do think Wilson like made his teammates better with
Hmm.
everything that he did. We can go through it, line by line. But I'm some of these other guys that are like ahead of, and this is a very like short list of players, so you'll know who I'm talking about, but it's like Darren Peterson is sick. I really like a lot of things about his game. He's like the archetypal shooting guard prospect in some regards, but like um does he make his teammates better? Like right now,
The numbers would say he does not or
that
has
right,
not yet.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of up for. I mean, like he might learn it one day, and I think there are examples like Anthony Edwards is a guy who learned it, and now he's great at doing it. So it's like there are ways for Peterson to get there, but I think Wilson with his playmaking is maybe a little bit more like connective, short roll, that kind of stuff, cuts that lead into a second pass, open floor passing. I mean, like he can pass for sure. Like it's just like overall his playmaking is not as well-rounded maybe as Boozer's at the moment, but the explosive finishing, this unbelievable, above the rim threat, 67 dunks in 24 games this season, which is a preposterous number. 4.1 dunks per 40 minutes. Was in the 99th percentile. Uh,
67 dunks on 77 attempts.
is
He's so
insane.
ambitious that he's missed
In
10 dunks,
in
which
some
like
of the
never happens. But
so,
yeah, it's
some of the dunks he had this season were just, I mean, truly the result of like this guy being a pogo stick vertical athlete, and also I don't know what his wingspan is, but he's 6'10", long, clearly has a plus wingspan. And I mean, I think a lot of people can close their eyes and think of some of the big finishes he had this season, but I swear there was a game they played East Tennessee State in like right before the winter break, and he like set a screen, and then he for one of the guards, and then he like slipped, like short rolled into space, and he probably caught the ball around like the nail area. And I don't know. I mean, it's like one of those things you don't want to be. It's like someone has certainly done this before, but I had not seen a college player do it in a long time. He didn't put the ball on the court. He just caught the ball in the short roll, took two strides, and then was at the rim to dunk it.
hmm
And he covered such tremendous ground, and like the dunk was sick too. Like he like you know flew, he just sailed through the air to get there, and he did stuff like that all the time this year. And one, if you recognize that like basketball and like scouting and sort of like identifying players, you're looking for like the weirdos, right? Because
Of
basketball is
course.
a game of just it is a game of guys who can do and guys and men and women who can do insane things physically. And Wilson is like in that tier of just like jumps off the screen or off the court wherever you're watching him from. And I think like not only does that stuff like look good on like the Caleb Wilson, mixtape or whatever, but I think he has so much gravity going towards the rim. And obviously he's a good, I do think he's a good passer and decision maker. He's a pretty low turnover player for a guy with his usage.
hmm
That I think like that is the part of his offense that did actually help create opening because it's just he's going to cave in off a defense in, and that's going to create drop offs and kickouts, that kind of stuff. The one part of his offense that was like I guess in a vacuum good, but I'm not sure it really like did much for others was the sort of like mid post isolation game when that was a huge part of his half court offense, right? Like
hmm
really big piece of this. Like I was looking this up, I was before we recorded. He scored 17.1 unassisted points per 40 minutes this season. It's 99th percentile. It's a lot of like putback buckets too, of course, that gets factored into that. But he also averaged 3.6 2-point attempts per 40 minutes from outside the paint. That was in the 98th percentile. That was about 23% of his total shots this season. Pretty big number. Now he shot 47% on those twos, which is a very good number. To me, he was like a little too over. He was a little too reliant on those at times. But again, if he's gonna make almost half of them, it's hard to argue with it as like just inherently like a bad shot. And again, he made a lot of like tough looks, that kind of stuff too, spinning, fading, twisting, difficult shots. Against
Yeah.
good contest, tough. Late in the clock, all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that like it's interesting because if he does grow into being a star in the NBA, that could be a piece of his game. This sort of like interior isolation scoring. That's the domain of stars in the NBA. I just don't know if it was quite the thing that like allowed other guys to like eat off of it. Though he was able to supplement that with plenty of other stuff that helped get guys open too.
So two things on that because I think it's very interesting, and I want to talk about that in conjunction with him being a low turnover player.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and my episode with Bennett when I talked about Caleb, we were trying to come up with a comp for Caleb, and I was trying to articulate why I was higher on Caleb than I feel like most are. And in my opinion, he is the guy who, if you're going to, I mean, you could always use the cliche, we're just scratching the surface for any of these guys.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it applies more to him than it applies to even to Boozer or Peterson or DeBonsa because of exactly about what you're saying with those ISO looks, because those are not, you see them and you're like, that's not an NBA look. Not that he
Mhm.
can't make them in the NBA, but you're like, an NBA offense is not going to orient itself around these kinds of looks unless you're like an MVP candidate. Like that,
Yeah.
you're just not going to get the reign to do this sort of thing. But what an NBA offense will do is more of what Duke has done for Boozer, which is like run inverted pick and roll, which UNC
Mhm.
didn't really do with him much at all.
They only did it when he screened for Vazar. That was like a pet play of theirs this season. But yeah,
Yeah, like the
there was
snug pick and roll in the
yeah.
middle of it, and it looked unstoppable when they would
Yeah.
run it. But
They
whatever.
would run it once every 2 games. It would get a dunk, and then they wouldn't do it again for another week or whatever.
Yeah,
But yeah, there
they
were
like they beat Ohio State with that play, but whatever. It's
yes,
like
yes, that is it is the play. And like it worked against a bunch of different teams, a bunch of different like pick and roll coverages. Yeah, and it just felt like you wanted to see them run that with Hank and Caleb just a few more
yeah,
times this
and
season.
look, I love me some Vasar. You know that from our last episode. I still really like Vasar and think that he could go in the first round, and I wouldn't be mad at it at all.
Mhm.
But like if you're thinking about who to screen for, like
Yeah,
the guy who can get to the rim in 2 strides from the 3-point line might be someone worth screening for. But
just vaguely.
anyway,
Yeah.
it's okay. It's neither here nor there ultimately because he's not playing anymore. But the fact is, another thing about those ISO looks. Traditionally, there's this thought that if you play really heavily in isolation, you are not going to be that turnover a prone player that like as ISO numbers go up or as ISO frequency goes up, turnovers go down because you're just not passing the ball and turnovers
Mhm.
happen when you
Yeah.
pass the ball because you're passing into the teeth of a defense. And Caleb is not quite that way. He's a low turnover player, but he does pass out of those looks. Those looks are not only difficult scoring looks, they're difficult passing looks because there were many times where they didn't just automatically send two to the ball because college coaches are like, yeah, take a fadeaway 19-footer, Caleb, please. And number one, he would hit them, and you're like, is this a like you said, like, is this a star? Like, is this the fuzzy outline of a star if his touch is this good at looks
Mhm.
this hard? And number two, he would pass through like very set defenses with velocity, with audacious skips to the other side of the floor that, in my opinion, were like underratedly accurate. His he had a 12.6 turnover percentage is what I'm seeing for him, which
Mhm.
is very good, quite low, and more in line with, I'll tell you who it's in line with. Here's a little search I just did on Caleb, okay? This is high major players, assist percentage greater than 15, Caleb is at 18. A turnover percentage less than 16, he's at 12.6, and 50 dunks. High major
Mhm.
players. So it's just
This
three,
season.
no,
Okay, awesome.
three ever. Three categories: assist percentage greater than 15, turnover percentage less than 16, 50 dunks. This list is 5 players long. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this will be the fun little guessing game.
Okay.
There's been one other freshman who's done it. The freshman went to Duke. Who do you think that freshman is? Remember,
Cooper Flag.
nope, I don't think Cooper had
Zion.
Zion
Yeah.
Williamson.
Zion. I was
The
gonna
other,
say maybe sophomore Blake Griffin potentially too. I don't know if he would have had the assist numbers, but
so the Bartorvik, which is what I'm using for this, didn't track dunks that
ah,
far back.
okay,
So
gotcha.
it might be. It might be him. I think they started tracking dunks in like 2012. This is like a 15-year
Yeah.
sample. So the other three were senior Oso Ighodaro at Marquette. in
Playing
2024.
like point center for Shaka Smart.
That's right.
He and Tyler Kolek.
Uh, I think 22-year-old junior Trace Jackson Davis for Indiana
Yeah.
and sophomore Zach Edey for Purdue, 2022.
Yeah.
So, like, which is to say, the only guy that really is reminiscent of Caleb, not only in age, but in just sort of like how he played, is I would say probably Zion. And
Hmm.
Zion is his NBA career is what it is. And still arguably a successful one, even if it's in an ebb right now with his everything going on in New Orleans. But like that's what I mean with him when you're like, well, why is no one else able to do this? Usually dunks mean that you're like finishing plays, and that usually means that you shouldn't be turning the ball over. But then why is he able to, even though his team does very little to make it easier on him, how is he able to execute these passes? It's this sort of subtle stuff with him, in my opinion, subtle stuff with him that I think makes him, at the very least, a more interesting player than DeBonsa or Peterson because DeBonsa, for all of his blessings, needs the ball. Like he will need the ball. He will and an NBA team will be happy to give him the ball because they see him as like an on-ball franchise star. And there's a very good chance he will become one. And Peterson, to your point, hasn't really figured out how to leave his mark on a game apart from just like scoring a point a minute, which is a
Hmm.
pretty damn good way to leave a mark on a game. But like Wilson's two-way value is very, very clear. And he's 6'9", and he has this sort of latent feel that I don't think has been given the chance to blossom. And when he's with, again, better talent in the NBA, if he were to go to play with Tyrese Halliburton and get out in the open court and have stuff made very easy for him, like I find the possibilities with him, like I said, at least more interesting than DeBonsa and Peterson. And there's a good chance I'll have him ranked ahead of one, if not both.
And we haven't even discussed the defensive portion of this yet,
Right.
which is
Right.
like he's
Better defensive
arguably,
prospect than all those guys I listed,
yeah,
including Zion.
and he's
Yes.
maybe the most exciting defensive prospect in this class
Right.
too, right? I
Right.
mean, not perfect on that end, but the high end upside and the impact he brings on that side is potentially special in game changing too. And again, sort of like similar to what I was saying with Cam, like super competitive, super good teammate, well liked, all that stuff. Like he checks the other boxes that you would want to see. And yeah, I he was awesome this season. I'm bummed he got hurt. I was at the Duke UNC game last Saturday, and it was the day before he was declared out, and I was really looking forward to hopefully seeing him up close because I just thought, it probably had been since Zion that I'd gotten to see an athlete like that,
Mm-hmm.
in person. No dice, but
What would have been a hell of a lead in for this episode, talking
yeah,
about that matchup.
certainly,
Of course, but
certainly. But
it's okay.
unbelievable season, and yeah, he, probably coming into the year, it was interesting. He was throwing up in a bunch of top seven, top eight, top 10 pick in these mocks, and then just like he immediately rushed up to the fourth spot, and then just sort of like was there all year, seemingly because he just couldn't quite crack into the top three. But it's like we probably need to be thinking about why that's the case. You know what I mean? Just the sort of like anchoring. Uh,
And well, that's what it is. And
yeah,
look, those other guys have all had amazing games and amazing moments. Like what, Peterson during the first half against BYU looked like he was the best player in the draft.
yeah,
DeBonta has looked at various times like the best player in the draft. Same with Boozer. So like, I don't think it's a you dummy consensus. Like that's not what this is.
yeah,
It's just that those other players have also had like there's very identifiable accommodations the teams are going to have to make with them. At least in my opinion, I think Peterson is going to have to play with a point guard at least early in his career. Your
No
comp
doubt.
to Ant Edwards is a very good one. Ant now can more or less play de facto point, but it's
Mhm.
still sort of like a playoff question. I mean, if
Yeah.
Peterson got to an Ant level outcome, who really cares? It's amazing. But
Yeah.
like it's that has been something in his career that he's had to figure out. Who knows if Peterson will? Uh, and DeBonsa, like as an off-ball player, there's real questions. Real questions. Now, on ball's tremendous, but it's again, I like to think about players that are really, really scalable, that are malleable, as we've discussed how these offenses are developing. And I just see Caleb as that. And just as to put a button on the low turnover thing with him, I think a reason why he turns the ball over so little is because he's so athletic that
Yeah.
his defenders cannot like there's many ways to force a turnover, right? You can beat a guy to a spot. You can anticipate where someone's going to go. And even in ISO where like the range of outcomes is more limited, right? Like you're between the guy and the rim, he's either going to go up over you or he's going to try to go around or through you. That should be easier to like gear up to draw a charge in or to try to swipe a dribble from. And they just couldn't do it with him. Too
Mhm.
athletic, too sudden, and I think a subtly pretty well calibrated guy in terms of whether to shoot, pass, or drive. So
The only other thing we were probably obligated to mention this, like I don't think you or I are too worried about it because we're literally just gonna be tacking it on here at the end. He did shoot just 7 of 27 from deep this season,
that's right. Of
26%. I understand, like that's probably gonna be like a that's gonna be a turnoff to some. That's gonna be if you're splitting hairs between some of these other guys maybe that's going to be enough to sway you towards having him his ceiling be pick four, whatever it is. And it's like it is like a valid concern. Like
of
I
course.
do have this worry that Wilson gets to the pros and like he can be an impactful defender, but all he can do offensively for you is like finish in the dunker, transition, put back. Like I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I think there's some scenario where the playmaking doesn't quite get to where you and I think it might, and then the shooting never comes online, and then all of a sudden like he's really limited in terms of just like dunks around the hoop. And like that's still not a bad thing to have, but then it becomes like, well, what kind of player? What player is that? So ultimately, like that's I'm not too worried about that with him, but it is something like you do kind of have to flag the issues with a perimeter jump shot. But I guess the hope is you're looking like, well, 71% from the line, high 40s from mid-range shots. He clearly has some touch indicators. Like
Hmm.
we'll get in the lab with him and we'll work this out. And it's like that's fair. Or maybe you sort of expect some type of like Thompson twin style package for him offensively, where he's sort of, you have to be like a little unorthodox and it's going to matter who your center is and all that kind of stuff. Maybe at least for the first year or two, and then he can continue to like expand his offense. But I see different pathways for him, but that is going to be something obviously that whomever drafts him is going to have to sort of like manage around.
Yeah, and I would hope that he ends up in a situation that isn't like, okay, Caleb, like we're gonna put you in the corner, and for these first 2 years, just worry about working on your threes.
Yeah,
Like to
no, don't do
me,
that.
you to me, you try to get him as many looks at the rim as possible. When defenses can prove that they can take that away and make that like a less than ideal option for him, then okay. And then you sort of unlock the playmaking. And then if teams are really sagging off and packing the paint and whatever, then you make sure he has confidence shooting his threes. And I've I've had that concern myself, but it's, you know, I would rather I think he has enough outlier traits that can go in a positive direction that I feel like it's sort of nitpicking a bit to look at how the it's like, well, yes, of course. The the 6'9" dunk machine who can defend four positions isn't a good 3-point shooter yet. If he
Yeah.
were, then he'd be like Cooper Flag or
Yeah.
whatever. You know, like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's still probably worth a very, very, very high pick. But yeah.
Agreed. Agreed.
Um, okay, so how much time do you have, Brian?
So it's midnight right now. It's getting, I'm not gonna lie, it's getting late on the East Coast here.
With apologies to Abuka Corey, Michael Brown, and we were going to try to use Abuka to get into a small guards thought, Darius Acuff, Tyler Tanner type of discussion, which is one that I do intend on having. I think sort of Hornets, Knueppel, NBA offensive evolution, Boozer, Caleb. I feel like that's enough of a full meal for our listeners. So, Brian, thank you very much. What is going on Split the Action and on Buzzbeat?
Yes, Buzzbeat. I did Buzzbeat Plus episode with Nate Duncan, the Dunked On
Oh,
pod. He came
excellent.
on last week, which was cool. We put out another pod that came out Tuesday morning, March 10th. That was sort of about some of the lull that they're hitting, a bit of a lull that they're hitting on the West Coast swing here, but we're gonna have Hornets coverage throughout the season. And like, we've done some draft stuff already. Usually by this point in the season, we're all in on the draft. There's actually a basketball team to talk about and cover, but we put out 2 episodes a week. One's free, one's a premium episode. If you subscribe to our Substack page, Buzzbeat Plus, you can get that and all other kinds of like Hornets coverage. There's a lot of goodies in the off season. We do a lot of like draft prospect rankings and scouting reports that are in there. There's like a Google Drive that you can have access to that has all of this and free agency rankings and all of those types of things. And it's going to be a busy offseason, most likely for Charlotte. Um, 2 first-round picks and maybe some other roster, the Kobe White free agency, Brandon Miller extension. So the next 4 months, I think, are going to be very busy over there. At Split the Action, I'm trying to think of an idea. I want to write something this weekend, but I'm struggling. I kind of want to write something about Juke Harris, but I'm not sure it's going to happen in time. But there will be something I'm sure this week at Split the Action. And again, people, please subscribe there. It's free. There's no ads on the website. It's good basketball coverage, and we'll be covering March Madness, the conference tournaments, the NCAA tournament, and then like we will also be really leaning into the transfer portal draft coverage as the offseason approaches. Still to this date, the piece of mine that has the most traffic on Split the Action was my Cedric Coward scouting report last year. So, and he's balling, man. The 2025 draft, what a class! It is also insane that like John Shire almost got Cedric Coward to come and play with Cam Boozer in Durham. I mean, that was very close to happening actually, but I digress. But there will be all kinds of off-season coverage. It's deep dives, film work, scouting reports, stats, and yeah, free and no ads. It's a very
Well,
clean, friendly basketball viewing experience.
look, I know your standards are quite high at Split the Action, but don't let writer's block let writer's block happen like the end of July.
Yeah,
We're in March. Just be like, here are some really cool things that happened in the ACC tournament, you know?
it's true. I need to get to
Here's
that. Right now, my job is getting in. My actual job is getting in the way of basketball consumption and writing at the moment. But we'll have to see as the weekend approaches. That hopefully there will be a little more time on the horizon. But there's going to be hopefully more of that kind of like reactive, observational types of writing, and less of my indulgent 5,000 words on the inverted pick and roll with Cam Boozer, of which I've written that piece like 3 times this year.
Hey
So
man, that's
yeah,
what it's the indulgent stuff that is timeless,
it's
you
my
know?
website. I get to do with it
Yeah.
whatever I want. I don't have
Yeah,
any
you're already paying the bills with a different job. So this is all
exactly.
gravy. So,
Yeah.
Brian, you're the man. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.